Armchair commanders, we call the shots. From our living room thrones where the action's hot. We're the generals of fiction, the masters of war. In silver screen battles with buttered popcorn. Armchair commanders, armchair commanders.
I have to bring my booze, guys. I feel like I'm letting you down.
That's a cardinal sin around here. That's fine.
Take your laps.
Welcome to the Armchair Commanders podcast. My name's John.
And I'm Jack.
And this week we're reviewing Fling Leathernecks with author and historian John Bruning. John, welcome. If you'd like to tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. My name's John Bruning. I have written 25 books or co-authored 25 books over the course of my career. Got my start making computer video games. So if you ever played Aces of the Pacific or Red Baron or Aces Over Europe, the old Dynamics games, I was involved in those.
you did Red Baron?
Yeah.
That was my shit as a kid.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah. I have a copy of that on Steam right now.
Oh my!
I still play it. Oh yeah, you can get it on Steam.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'll have to do that because, when my kids were growing up, they'd sit in my lap and they would play it. But I was the original designer on Red Baron 2 also, and then I left the company in '96 to start a writing career. But yeah, it was my graduate school job, and then I left grad school to be a designer, and then I left being a designer to be a writer. And most recently, I was fortunate to have a book published about the first two squadrons that went into Guadalcanal, John L. Smith's VMF 223 and Richard Mangram's VMSB 232. And it came out a couple of weeks ago, and folks seem to be liking it, so that makes me happy that these Marines are getting a little bit of attention from a new generation of Americans.
Well, I gotta say your advertising is definitely working, because that's how I found you, was an ad for your most recent book about it. So,
oh, is that right?
Yeah.
On Instagram?
At least you know your advertising money is working.
Right on. Good to know.
I will say, though, like, I knew you had written quite a few books, but I had no idea that you were also involved in the video game industry at one point. And the fact that you're involved in a very, like, big game that was formative to me in my youth, like, that's awesome. That's my shock of the day. So
I just bought it on Steam.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Yeah, my boss, Damon Sly, was one of the co-founders of Dynamics, and he was such a great guy. I miss him. I think at the time I was young and I didn't really fully appreciate just what he brought to the table, but man, in retrospect, he was pure genius. And when he left and left the company in '93, he went off and did remarkable things. He went and got his pilot's license and just built an entire life down in Eugene. And yeah, he's a really great guy.
Well, I guess we should move on to our subject of the day, which is another John Wayne classic, Fling Leathernecks. This is probably our fourth or fifth John Wayne film we've done, and I know we had chatted a little bit about it earlier, but around here we kind of have a love-hate relationship with John Wayne, because, you know, he's a pillar of early Hollywood, and he's in a lot of, you know, very important films in the history of cinema, but also John Wayne is John Wayne.
A raging racist.
There is that, and the alcohol issue too. But I mean, don't we all struggle with alcohol to a degree?
I would never let that demon rum touch my lips. Also, please tell me you heard that I opened a beer right next to my mic.
No, you did. You unmuted yourself right as you cracked it.
God damn it!
I mean, that's but yeah, that's the thing, is like, John Wayne is in a lot of great classic films. A lot of films that I enjoy. I wouldn't. There's a lot of films he's in that I wouldn't classify as good necessarily. Mostly because it doesn't matter what film John Wayne is in. Or what character you say he's playing. John Wayne is not playing that character. He's playing himself. So there's something to be said about that. But Jack, I know you hadn't seen this film before. What is your initial impressions of it?
You know, I expected a lot less when I was in for a John Wayne movie, but this one surprised me pleasantly.
What about it was different for you?
So, yeah, I know I'm a bit jaded when it comes to effects living in 2024, but, some of these effects for 1951 were really good.
Yeah, it's...
Man, for a second, I actually believed that he hated Japanese people.
It was almost believable. What I will say is, this is our second aviation John Wayne film we've done. I don't know how many aviation films he did, but the first one we did was a long time ago. We reviewed Flying Tigers.
Oh, Flying Tigers, yeah, okay. The writer for Flying Leathernecks, what's his name? Kenneth Grant. He wrote Flying Tigers, so they basically reunited for this movie.
I was going to say, you could see, as far as cinematography goes, there's a lot of similarities between the two films, but it definitely feels as though, I would say this film was much better than Flying Tigers. It seems like Flying Tigers was like a trial run, and they dialed it in and made Flying Leathernecks like the good version of Flying Tigers.
So, John, can we go back to John Wayne for a sec?
Absolutely.
I have a story. Okay, so years ago I wrote a book called The Devil's Sandbox, which was about 2nd Battalion, 162nd Infantry in Iraq during OIF 2, so 04, 05 Iraq. And this was an Oregon National Guard battalion from my area. I ended up running an OPFOR group that was basically provided training support for 12 years for them. So I came to love these guys, and really, some of my lifelong friends were from this battalion, or came from this battalion in that project. And one of them was Sergeant Alan Ezell. Ezell was one of the most imposing human beings I'd ever met back in 2005 when I started working on this book. Scared the ever-loving crap out of me. One of the other NCOs once quipped, "So Easy looks like a guy who's been fed a steady diet of lizards and babies."
What?
It's oddly specific.
Yeah, it's some experience talking there.
And Easy was easily one of the toughest human beings that I've ever met. He worships John Wayne. And in fact, there was a little prayer that the unit used to say about John Wayne, and I wish I could remember it. It just hit me when you were talking about him just now. And what struck me when I discovered that he had this deep and abiding love of John Wayne was John Wayne had never gone to combat, right? He was a tough guy in name only and on screen only, right? And here's Alan Ezell, a guy who worshipped the ground that John Wayne walked on. And one day in 2004, Easy ran across a bridge in Baghdad that went across the Tigris River. It was a very long bridge to rescue the men of the 1st Iraqi Special Forces unit to go into combat after we reconstituted their army. And he went back and forth across this bridge under fire from somewhere around 90 to 100, like a company minus strength of insurgents who apparently were Syrians. And he personally rescued this unit. and repeatedly exposed himself to fire and was decorated for this. And so it just strikes me that the man who hero worshipped, the silver screen badass, was actually a much bigger badass than John Wayne ever was or ever would be. So,
Hey, you got to draw inspiration from somewhere.
yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. And when you look at this movie, when you look at the Flying Leathernecks, you can see that John Wayne is essentially playing almost the same character he played in Sands of Iwo Jima, right? And that's in part because James Edward Grant was the other screenwriter for this, and he wrote Sands of Iwo Jima. So at that point, they were working on a John Wayne formula, I guess.
To be a writer in the 1950s had to have been way simpler.
As long as you stayed off the blacklist, which actually played a role in this film, too. There was, we talk about the political divide today. That set was very fractured politically because of the Red Scare and John Wayne's politics.
That was something. So I've probably watched this film dozens of times. It's something I've talked about on this show before, and I discussed with you. A big part of my upbringing and like my love of film started with spending time with my grandfather, and he was a huge John Wayne guy. So, I've seen this movie a number of times before, but this is the first time. It's probably been years since I've watched it, so this is the first time that I've watched it from the lens of I'm not just sitting down and eating some popcorn while watching this movie. This is the first time I've ever sat down to focus on it, if you will. And the very first thing that struck me was when the ROK production studio banner went up was Howard Hughes Presents, and I was like, holy shit, this is a Howard Hughes movie? And I went down the rabbit hole, and I was like, you mentioned the Red Scare, and Howard Hughes was just as bad, he was just as bad as McCarthy when it came to it. He fired hundreds of people from the studio. He basically had his own anti-communist manifesto rampage he went on when he took over this production company.
I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised. I mean, there was considerable pushback and terror and alarm. I mean, it was a really unusual time in American history in some respects. But so the director and the guy who played Griff, Robert Ryan, they were very much appalled at the blacklist and the McCarthyites and all of that. And John Wayne, of course, was definitely in the right-wing camp, along with the guy who played Clancy, the crew chief, J.C. Flippin. And Flippin was just as conservative as John Wayne. And there was a lot of friction on the set as a result. But somehow, and I'm not sure exactly what happened, but John Wayne and Robert Ryan came to sort of an agreement, and they were able to work together pretty well on this film. And they had a lot of scenes together, but when, a decade later, they were on the set of The Longest Day together, it was open warfare between those two because of their politics.
I guess I didn't recognize that Robert Ryan was in The Longest Day. I'm going to have to go back and check that out. Wait a minute. Did he play the now I'm thinking about, did he play the British colonel that was in the Juno Beach scene?
Not sure. It's been years since I've seen the film. I'm checking this right now. He was.
He played
Gavin.
Yeah, he played General Gavin. Never mind then.
Wow, I didn't realize that he played General Gavin. Wait,
we did The Longest Day as a D-Day special last year.
Right on. Yeah, that's impressive production for sure, especially for 1962. But actually, as I was watching the credits in Flying Leathernecks, there was a technical consultant who I think it was a lieutenant colonel, Marine lieutenant colonel. And I haven't had a chance to check this out, but I really wonder if he had either known guys who were on Guadalcanal or had been on Guadalcanal himself, because so up until last weekend, I hadn't seen this movie since I was in junior high, maybe late elementary school. But after writing this book on Guadalcanal and really getting into the weeds on what life was like and how they were able to maintain the airplanes and keep them flying despite the terrible conditions, they had so many little details in Flying Leathernecks that just pinged with me. I just there was a moment where they were talking about getting the chamois to refuel the aircraft, and that was a thing. A guy in the Cub 1 unit so the Cub 1 unit was basically a ground crew and ground support echelon that went in before the two squadrons arrived at Guadalcanal, the first two units. And when the two squadrons first arrived, they didn't have their ground echelon. They didn't have any of their tools. They didn't have any spare parts except what they could cram into the rear cockpit of the SBDs and VMSB 232. So they had virtually nothing, and Cub 1 supported them for days until the ground echelons arrived. And those guys were fueling the planes with captured Japanese fuel, which they mentioned in the Flying Leatherneck, and it was so impure and such a lower octane that the only way to do it without causing engine damage was to filter the gas through these chamois that somebody in Cub 1, and I can't remember who it was, grabbed just before they got on the ship to take them to Guadalcanal, right? And I mean, who has ever even heard of that? But those chamois were the reason why they were actually able to function, and without them, it would have been, they wouldn't have been able to function. They wouldn't have been able to fly without losing planes to engine failure. And there's a reference to it at the beginning of the movie when they first get to Guadalcanal. It's like, wow, somebody really did their research on that or was there.
See, that's this is one of the reasons that I enjoy bringing guests like you on, is because I have a degree in history, and I like to think that I have a good understanding about a lot of the things we talk about, but little details like that, that's something I personally never would have caught or thought about as far as a detail goes in a film.
Yeah, I mean,
but it tracks, because I remember I read a couple of years ago, forgot the name of the author, but it was a Japanese veteran. He was the captain of the Amatsukaze, which was a Japanese destroyer.
Japanese destroyer captain.
Yeah,
that's a really interesting book.
It is a fantastic book. But I remember, when you mentioned that, it made me think about, one of the things he talked about where he's they, on the destroyer, they wouldn't have target practice, and they wouldn't even open up on airplanes if they remotely thought it was slightly outside of range because of how limited, their ammunition supplies were, even in the early part of the wars. Mm-hmm. And it's crazy to think that, Guadalcanal was 42, right? It's crazy to think that what a year earlier would have been a premier air force in the world who, immobilized America's Pacific Fleet was reduced to in the matter of, months after the fact.
Guadalcanal ground the Imperial Japanese Navy air units down to shadows of their former selves, and that's one of the great contributions that Marine aviation played not just to the campaign, but to the war. I mean, you got to keep in mind that, so Guadalcanal was the first American offensive of World War II, right? This happened in August of 1942. The first offensive over in the ETO, MTO was Operation Torch, which happened in November 42, the landings in Northwest Africa. So this is our first attempt at an amphibious landing against a defended beach, and the first offensive of the war. And it was thrown together at the last minute because they were responding to Japanese moves to cut off Australia from our sea lanes that ran through the South Pacific up to the west coast of the U.S. And I mean, it was also hastily thrown together, and the logistics were so impossibly slim that the code name Operation Watchtower was sort of replaced by a nickname, which was Operation Shoestring, right? And it really was a shoestring affair. And when the Marines are landed ashore on August 7th, 1942, they surprised the Japanese, and there were very few combat units on Guadalcanal at the time. The actual combat units, the Special Naval Landing Force, the Japanese Marines, were across Savo Sound defending Tulagi, the anchorage, right? So it was a construction unit that was building the airfield that the Marines initially ran into, and they ran. They just bolted into the jungle. So they took the airfield very quickly, but the Japanese response was so swift, it drove the U.S. Navy away for several weeks. And the transports that had most of the 1st Marine Division's equipment, supplies, food, water, ammunition, everything they needed to sustain themselves on the island, abandoned them, just left, because the American aircraft carriers providing air support pulled out. And this was after the Japanese sent a surface force down and sank 4 Allied cruisers, 3 U.S. and 1 Australian, in what was the worst defeat in U.S. Navy history. You know, you could argue Pearl Harbor was, but this was a surface-to-surface engagement at night, and we lost 1,000 sailors. So now the Marines are stuck out there in contested waters, under contested air space, and they had 3 units of fire with them on the island. So they had 3 days worth of ammunition, and they had no air support. They had no means of being swiftly reinforced or resupplied. The U.S. Navy took to sending up penny packet supply runs on fast transports, which were basically converted World War I destroyers. And to even finish construction of the airfield that they had been sent to seize in the first place, they had to use captured Japanese equipment they found around the airfield. And at the same time, they didn't have enough food. The food wasn't offloaded, but they had captured a bunch of Japanese food around the airfield, and those stocks ended up sustaining the Marines for well over a month. And so that's kind of the historical context of the Flying Leathernecks. And what the film depicts is the first fighter squadron that went in. And of course, it's fictionalized as VMF 247. And John Wayne plays, what's his name? Major Dan Kirby.
He was supposed to loosely be based around one of the Medal of Honor recipients from Guadalcanal, right?
Yes, that would be Major John L. Smith, who brought the first squadron into Guadalcanal, VMF 223. And actually, John L. was a disciplinarian. He was a hard ass, but he was nothing like the way he's portrayed in the film at all. In fact, the way John L. ran VMF 223 was very different than I suspect he ran other units he commanded later on in the war. This was his first command. And okay, so you remember the beginning of the movie? All of the guys in the squadron are hanging out in the ready room. They're all drinking, and they're about to celebrate the fact that Griff is going to get the squadron.
Yeah.
And then, boom, in walks John Wayne, and everybody goes, wait a minute, why do we have this guy? Griff is our commanding officer, right? Griff's the XO. So you instantly set up this friction between the two senior officers and the rank and file in the squadron.
That was definitely like when that scene came up. I'm like, we're 3 minutes into this movie and we've already hit our first major war movie trope, which is the commanding officer XO hate each other, trope, and they have to like get along and at the end learn to like respect each other thing.
Yeah, that's literally not how this squadron functioned at all, because July 1st, 1942, John L. had a squadron in name only. It was himself, his XO, Rivers Morrell, who was a Naval Academy grad and a former football star for Annapolis. He was one of the team captains, all-around great guy, and the two of them respected and liked each other very much. So you had the CO, the XO, there were a couple of pilots, they had a couple of planes, and I think they had maybe 9 enlisted guys, and that was it. They were basically a rump of a squadron waiting for replacements to come in. And because the Guadalcanal campaign was in the works, they surged pilots out of training command and sent them to John L. and to Richard Mangrum, who was the dive bomber squadron's skipper. And so they get so John L. and Richard Mangrum get ordered to meet with the MAG 23, Marine Air Group 23 senior leadership in early July. They go in to meet to have that meeting, and they were told, you're going to be fleshed out. Your squadrons will be brought up to strength. You're going to get new airplanes. You have 1 month to train your pilots and get them ready for combat, and then you're going to be in combat somewhere in the Pacific. So that was the mission. Get a bunch of pilots straight from training command, ready to face some of the most experienced and most thoroughly blooded combat veteran aviators in the history of combat aviation. And these were guys who had maybe 300 hours training time when they went through Pensacola and Corpus Christi. They were supposed to go through something called Carrier Air Group training, where they were supposed to get tactical instruction and taught to fly the latest combat aircraft. None of them had more than a few hours there before they were put on ships and sent to Hawaii. So the idea that the squadron was, that they show in Flying Leathernecks, that the squadron was actually an integrated group before their CO came in, is completely backwards to the history. It was the exact opposite. It was Rivers Morrell and John L. Smith with no squadron, and then suddenly a ton of second lieutenants and a couple of guys who had just come from the thorough crushing of VMF 221 at Midway, at the Battle of Midway. And those guys included Marion Carl, who was an Oregon farm boy, who had actually brought one of the 2 aircraft back to Midway during the battle on June 4th that was flyable in his squadron. Everybody else either got shot up or shot down. The 25 aircraft in the squadron, only 2 were flyable at the end of the first mission, and 14 of the pilots were dead. So that's how the squadron was actually formed. So that whole dynamic that was set up was just a complete and total Hollywood fabrication.
I know that, me and Jack, we often text each other because we'll watch the movie independently of each other, but we'll text each other as we're watching them.
Cool.
And I remember he texted me probably at like 1 a.m. last night, and I just groggily kind of like looked at my phone. He's like, I'm 4 minutes into this movie and I hate it already.
Jack, what'd you hate about it?
I don't remember. I was very drunk last night. But
I remember you complaining about.
Now I remember. It was the fucking cowboy boots.
Oh,
and how
this ain't my first. What is this? A rodeo?
Yeah, he pronounced rodeo wrong. I mean, not that I give a shit about rodeo. I think it's stupid, but
But it's John Wayne. How many fucking cowboy movies is he in? Like,
yeah.
The
I
red
that
boots. Yeah.
that and he was talking about what was it? Clancy, who was who sent that kind of goes into a scene I did appreciate was when they're all sending letters home before shipping out. But Jack's like, man, Clancy's just simping hard over this, lady of the night.
Billy Castle
Oh, Billy Castle.
sends her that letter, and then she like puts it on a wall filled with letters.
And she's surrounded by
yeah.
she's like surrounded by 6 other dudes.
Oh, Billy.
Billy, she's not the woman you think she is.
Alas, poor William.
That's an interesting aspect of the film, though. And yeah, it's kind of cliche. Everybody's writing their last letters home and getting their effects in order. But there's actually a moment that I wrote about in 53 Days on Starvation Island, which is the book that I just had published on Guadalcanal. So the guys had no idea where they were going. And when they were told they were leaving on a Tuesday, they were given one last leave to go into Honolulu. And this is early August, and so the guys all went to go blow off steam. And then they were ordered to depart in 48 hours. So all of a sudden, John L. and Richard Mangrum and their XOs had to go round everybody up and find them in the bars around Honolulu to get them aboard America's first baby flat top, the USS Long Island, CVE-1. And they were able to get everybody but one guy, and he missed the movement. Who knows where he was? But they were pulling guys out of all sorts of interesting places.
There's I was going to say there's another really interesting book I read, and you've probably heard of it or read it, which is, I think it's Into Darkness or Descent into Darkness, and it's the memoir of a Navy diver. He worked as a salvage diver in Pearl Harbor during the war, and basically his entire wartime experience was, diving on the USS Arizona and the Utah and like all the ships that they had to recover and whatnot, getting valuable stuff off it like munitions or weapons and stuff. But one of the things he talks about, and I believe I've talked about this on an earlier episode, was, getting granted leave for, going downtown or whatever. And he like hops it, you mentioned finding people all over the place. One of the experiences he talks about is like getting into line, not really knowing what he was getting into line. He just sees a line of like 50 people outside of a building. So he's like, oh, it must be something fun to do in there. And it was a brothel, and literally like there's a line of, sailors and soldiers going out of this brothel, like 50, 60 people deep. And he's like, once I got to the building, I figured out what it was. And they're like, yeah, it's however many dollars and you get 2 minutes and that's it. Like, I was like, God, that sounds awful.
Oh, that's gross. So gross. It's like you cannot wear too many condoms in a situation like that.
There's not enough Purell in the world to fix that.
No. Oh my God. Yeah. When they got, so they were put aboard the Long Island and they were sent south. And when they got to Fiji, they were diverted to Fiji because they weren't even sure there was going to still be a Marine Corps presence on Guadalcanal. Somebody from Admiral Gormley's staff met them in Fiji and briefed them as to where they were going and what they were going to be doing. And when John L. sat down with the squadron and explained the situation and how dire it was, there was a kid named Scotty McLennan who was an Ivy Leaguer. He was from a very wealthy family in Chicago. He was one of the fresh-faced second lieutenants straight from training. He listened to what they were going to be going into, and he realized it was going to be a very, very, very rough deployment. So they headed north from Fiji, and they stopped one more time at a place called Afate in the New Hebrides. And while he was there, he wrote a letter to his brother, and he had just gotten married actually. And he wrote this letter to his brother and said, "Look, I don't think I'm going to make it through this. In case I don't, I am trusting you to take care of my wife." And he mailed the letter in Afate. It was one of the last times the family heard from him. And Scotty was shot down right at the end of the deployment. Oh, no, he was shot down in mid-September, so about halfway through. And his brother ended up marrying his widow in 1945. And his brother had been a naval officer as well. And the marriage wasn't a happy one. But they ended up being buried in the same cemetery in Chicago.
I'm not sure that's really what he meant by take care of my wife.
Well, he tried. He tried to do a good job. But anyway, yeah, so those letters, the last letters home, that as tropey as that is, and as cliched as it is, that was actually definitely a big part of the experience of getting to the island for the guys, for sure.
I appreciated it because, you know, everybody gets their little moment to be like reading out the like, and I know I'll make my parents proud, da, 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 or like send them my love, like all this kind of stuff. But then the very last letter that's shared is John Wayne's to his wife, and she does this like really long like, and Daddy says he loves you and he can't wait to get back and this, that, and the other. And like it pans over to looking at his actual letter, and it's just a sentence. It says, "I'm leaving. Don't know when I'll be back. Pray for us." And it's like, I appreciated that because it hits on a thing that isn't really touched on in movies that much, which is, you know, I'm sure their goal in that was, oh, we're just showing him as a gruff character. But I took that another way, which is, you know, military male during World War II is so heavily censored. Like, I'm sure that's pretty much all he could get away with saying is, you know, I'm leaving. Talk to you when I can. So that was a small detail that I did appreciate in this film.
That whole relationship, you know, if John Wayne is actually playing John L. Smith, the whole relationship between him and his wife was totally ahistorical. He didn't have kids at the time. He wrote very emotive letters home to Louise, his wife. His wife was, I think, an English major in college.
That is a 1940s name if I've ever heard one.
Yeah. So let me read you something that he actually wrote. So this is right at the end of the deployment. They'd just been bounced by the Japanese, surprised from above, and John L. himself had been shot down and had walked back in through the jungle after crash landing, and he lost several other pilots that day. So he writes, "Dear Louise, have lost the best I started out with. Lost one the same day I was lost, October 2nd. Would have rather had it been me instead of him. Hope I could see his family when I get back and tell him what a swell Marine he was. I know they will be proud of him. He just received the Distinguished Flying Cross the day before, and that was actually personally given to him by Admiral Nimitz. Really no justice in war, or he certainly would have gotten through. I've gotten..." Okay, so he's talking about Red Kendrick in that paragraph. Red was a Stanford prodigy and Harvard law school student. He graduated at age 20 from Stanford as a linguist, spoke 7 languages, came from a very wealthy San Francisco family, and he was killed on October 2nd. I've gotten 18 of them so far and am getting sick of seeing them burn and blow up in my face. Several times I've had to duck to get out of the debris. It isn't so funny when I'm on the receiving end of it. An admiral pinned the Navy Cross on me the other morning. I'm proud to get it, except they think that it's good payment for seeing young men and pilots who are sharing my tent go down in flames day after day. I don't mind saying that I am sick of this whole mess. All my love to you, John. So The gruffness that John Wayne plays John L. Smith, and the real almost cold, calculating, almost mercenary approach he has with the pilots through this deployment. And it becomes kind of the major theme about Griff's got to come to understand that he has to order and be able to order his men to die in order to take command. And that whole kind of subplot is played out finally when they're at Okinawa trying to stop the kamikaze attack and Cowboy gets killed. All of that is fabricated. It was not the way John L. ran that squadron at all.
What did you think about the fact that they bifurcated this film into Guadalcanal and then Okinawa? Because that's a solid chunk of time between those two engagements. And like me personally, I felt in the way that they edited this film, it made it seem like it was one right after the other.
They did.
So yeah. I didn't particularly care for that. I wish they had just chosen one place and stuck with it. Me personally, like, I wish they had just done like a start to finish Guadalcanal movie or start to finish like We're Stopping Kamikazes movie. But the fact that they did both kind of threw me off.
It was, you're right, John. It was an odd decision to do that. And it was even odder because when John L. went back out, he went to the Philippines and he was doing nothing but ground attack and ground support missions in the Philippines. So that whole Okinawa segment of the movie is kind of roughly based on the Death Rattlers deployment, which was VMF 323. Those guys ended up at Guadalcanal, and they were supporting the Marines there, on the ground with close air support missions. And then periodically they would be vectored to intercept kamikaze raids. So that actually happened. And some of the footage, some of the footage they used actually came from moments off Okinawa. And there's some particular gun camera footage that's absolutely historic that the National Archives in its eternal wisdom destroyed in the early 90s. And so the only place that it actually exists is in the Flying Leathernecks. So the movie actually becomes important to the aviation legacy of the Pacific War because it actually has some of this footage from wartime gun camera footage that doesn't exist anywhere else.
One of the things I appreciate about films from this time frame is, like, obviously you can tell between the studio shot scenes versus the newsreel, if you will, footage that they insert. But because it's so close in time and the film stock is so similar, it's a lot easier for them, or this is really the only point in time they can get away with inserting actual war footage into a film to basically add filler or context, if you will. Especially like the ground fighting scenes and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. The Marine Corps cameramen in the Pacific were easily some of the most brave combat cameramen in history. Those guys were right up there. And having done this myself in Afghanistan in 2010, I understand. I have a great appreciation for what they did. I mean, you look at the footage they shot on Iwo Jima, on Okinawa. Heck, there was a Medal of Honor moment captured by a Marine combat cameraman on Tarawa, Lieutenant Bonnyman's Medal of Honor. So they had access to all that footage from the islands. Then they also had all of the footage that was shot aboard ship and the gun camera footage for the air combat scenes. So they interspersed, actually using T6s or SNJs to represent zeros, and then reserve squadrons that were based at El Toro that were flying Hellcats at the time and F-4U Corsairs. So they had access to World War II aircraft that the Marine Corps was still flying, and they used those for a lot of those scenes. And then they cut in all of this color gun camera footage that was shot towards the end of the war. By actually, some of it was Navy, some of it came out of an Army Air Force documentary called The Last Bomb. And so it's actually, very stark, real graphic footage because it actually was real combat.
Yeah, there was a couple of scenes I was like, granted, it was newsreel footage and probably would have been shown in a theater at some point during the war, but I was like, man, I'm surprised this made it past the movie censors in 49 or 50 whenever this movie came out. Because there's guys bleeding out and like burned bodies. I'm like, Jesus, like this isn't special effect, guys. These are real people.
Yeah, and actually, John, there's an interesting story with that. A lot of that footage was classified all the way into the 1990s. It wasn't until 98 or 99 that the special projects color film was finally declassified. So General Marshall at the end of World War II wanted to document the final victory in color, and they created a couple of Signal Corps units to do it. SFP 186 was the one in Europe, and SFP 194 was the one in the Pacific. And they went out and filmed everything in color, and with the intent on making documentaries about it, like they did with like the Memphis Belle or The Last Bomb or Thunderbolt. And the footage was so graphic and so horrifying in certain cases that they just tucked it away. And as far as the Marine Corps footage went, a lot of that footage that the Marine Corps and their own cameramen shot never left Quantico. It never made it to the National Archives. So a lot of it wasn't seen for decades. So yeah, when you look at those scenes where the guys are very badly wounded and they're being treated by medics and whatnot, that's, to me, that seems like Nicholas Ray trying to, the director of the film, trying to tone down the jingoistic tone of the rest of the film and showing some of the true horrors of the war. And you see that in the bombardment scenes too on Guadalcanal, where you see guys just get vaporized by the naval bombardments.
Yeah, I find it interesting, and Jack will attest to this. We've talked about, we call them America fuck yeah moments, which is a reference to Team America. Mm-hmm. And like that's how this movie, it both starts and ends with an America fuck yeah moment, because in the beginning it's got the narrator that's like, these young Marines who are the defenders of freedom, da 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 da, and you're like, just start the movie, guys. Like, come on. Like, I get it.
Let's go.
And then the end of the movie is literally they're raising a flag with a flight of fighter planes flying over in a V formation, and you're like, God, there's legitimately great scenes in this movie, but when you bookend the movie with those two things, you're like, don't get me wrong, I appreciate like a rah go America film every now and again, but like, it's, if you do it incorrectly, it detracts from a movie, and I think that kind of the opening and ending of this movie kind of detracted from the film when there was a lot of good stuff in the middle.
I think that's emblematic of the conflict going on behind the scenes between the director Nicholas Ray and Howard Hughes, because Hughes, he wanted the rah Team America. I have a Team America, America fuck yeah, story for you if you want to hear it. But
Absolutely.
yeah, so you had Hughes on one side demanding this, and also this is the reason why they were able to get the support of the Marine Corps to make the film, was that it was very much a pro-Marine, pro-America film at a time where America was in another war. You know, this came out in 51, so we're, you know, neck deep in the Korean War by then. And at the same time, you had Nicholas Ray, who had a much different view of what this movie should be about, and they were kind of dueling back and forth, and you know, Ray got the moments in where he could, but Hughes was ultimately in charge, and you know, it was his film. So I've read in places that it was so contentious that Ray just basically ended up mailing it in, and so did Griff's actor Robert Ryan. They just basically decided, okay, whatever. And, you know, it's a paycheck. It's a payday. But as far as the America Fuck Yeah story, Team America came out, what, in 04?
Yeah, it was like a year or so after the invasion of Iraq.
Yeah. So in September of 05, I was embedded with 2nd Battalion, 162nd Infantry, Oregon National Guard. We were in New Orleans after Katrina, trying to stop. I think the official title was Operation Southern Comfort, and our job was to basically find people who needed help or stop the looting and the shooting that was going on. And it was dystopic beyond dystopic. I mean, over and over again, we talked about what apocalypse movie we were in today, you know, because like the entire city was virtually deserted. Everywhere we went, you know, everything was looted or destroyed from the flooding. And so I was with these guys who were 4 months to 5 months back from Iraq, and they were all supposed to start school on the GI Bill, and they get pulled from that and pulled from all of their plans to restart their lives, and they're thrown into this, and we're living right on the side of the floodwaters in the New Orleans Baptist Seminary. we were sleeping on the breezeway in front of the music hall, and you know, we'd wake up in the middle of the night. There'd be frogs under our whoobies with us, and snakes, and it was for me, it was pretty rugged. I'd never done much camping as a kid, and so here I am with this platoon that eventually got a presidential unit citation for what they did in Iraq. So very, you know, hard-bitten, grizzled veterans of the War on Terror. And they just start singing, America, fuck yeah, coming to save the motherfucking day. And so we just went all over the city, walking around, searching houses, knocking on doors, trying to find survivors, singing that song. So every time I hear it, it takes me right back to New Orleans and being completely overheated and worried that I'm going to pass out and do the kicking chicken from, you know, sunstroke.
Well, I'm glad I could bring up such happy memories for you.
Yeah, those were the days, man. Yeah, as much as it sucked, being with those guys was just an experience of a lifetime.
So, kind of a more focused question, Jack. Who was your favorite character in this film?
I liked the Navajo guy. I'm glad he survived.
Oh, call sign Injun.
Yes, the very racially sensitive call sign. Very inclusive for 1951.
Like I said, we text each other when we watch these movies, and I was like, hey, to be fair, you know, the racism in this movie is a lot more, like, pretty subdued. And he's like, how is it subdued? The native guy's called Injun. I was like...
No, I said, Eskimo babies are born with thicker skin. What?
But I told him, I'm like, we only know his call sign is that because it's on his coffee mug. They never call him that. And comparatively speaking...
Oh, yeah, I guess that's right.
Comparatively speaking, there's still issues, you know. It is a 1950s film with John Wayne in it. Like, there's going to be some race by today's standards, there's going to be race issues with it. But like comparatively speaking to some other films that we have watched and reviewed, this is super tame for John Wayne as far as the race thing goes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, honestly, do they refer to the Japanese as Japs in the film? I can't remember.
Oh yeah,
They do. Okay.
all the time.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, I don't like. Yeah, it's not an appropriate term for us to use today in our normal conversation. But like that is literally what everybody called them during the war. And like if I see a war movie today where they refer to the Japanese as that, I don't get upset about it because that's a faithful representation of how they would have talked.
I would 100% agree with you on that, John. Where I have the issue is where you have authors who are still using it without quotes and just...
Oh yeah, like they themselves are referring to the Japanese as that.
What are you doing, man?
Yeah. Like if Lieutenant so-and-so says the Japs did this, that is a direct quote from them. But if you are using that word it as your own reference to them, then that's not okay.
No, 100%. And I see it on the Facebook boards too. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who police that very quickly. So, yeah, like we've got to evolve past the wartime standards of decency. I mean, it has been 80 years. Like,
don't get me wrong. Like, I'm like obviously we've said the word here, but we ourselves are not referring to Japanese people as that. We are using it like we said. We are using it in the context of did they say this word X, Y, and Z, and like, granted, we're all Jack's not, he's Native American, but you and I, we're pasty white guys. So like, there's a couple of words that are like hard no-nos for us. But like that particular language doesn't fall in the like hard no section as long as we're using it appropriately, I think. Don't at me, Twitter, okay? Like,
yeah, I don't even use it when I'm taking notes. It just looks wrong. It feels wrong. And I know it's contextually correct, but you know what? To each their own, I guess. But, getting back to Jack talking about the Native American pilot, that was actually not that unusual in the Marine Corps, in Marine aviation. There were many, many Native American pilots, including Pappy Boyington. He was part Native American.
Pappy Boyington was?
Yeah.
I had no clue. Do you know what tribe or nation he belonged or was descended from?
I can't remember. That's a Bruce Gamble question. Bruce Gamble wrote Black Sheep 1 and then A Squadron History of the Black Sheep. Incredible historian. If you ever get a chance, check those out. And I want to say there were several. I can't remember if Joe Foss was. And actually, I ran into a couple of sources that said that John L. Smith was as well. I mean, he was from Lexington, Oklahoma, so that may have been the case. I couldn't pin that down, so I didn't bring it up in the book. But
okay, so I just looked it up, and according to the VA, it says that he is descended from the Brule Sioux tribe.
John L. or Pappy Boyington?
Boyington.
Oh,
Brule. Sorry, Jack.
Interesting. Yeah. So having that character in the movie was not in any way a stretch.
Well, it's a shame because one of the earliest films we reviewed was Wind Talkers.
Oh. Okay.
Which we weren't very kind to that movie. I'm sure you can probably guess for obvious reasons. But yeah, I mean, there was a pretty significant Native involvement in the Marine Corps during World War II.
For sure, for sure. And but at the same time, you didn't have African Americans in the Marine infantry ranks. You didn't have them in naval aviation. Jesse Brown was the first naval aviator who was African American, and that was post-war. So honestly, I wonder if he was included by the writers and the director as basically an attempt to be inclusive, to have somebody who was Native American to add to the mix to the squadron, to show that there was that level of diversity in the Corps in World War II. So I'm like, everything was an evolution, but that actually did happen in 1942, 43.
So, John, who is your favorite character in this movie?
Honestly, it would have to be the aircraft. I just love the airplanes. I suppose I like Cowboy. I didn't like the boots, like Jack didn't like the boots. You wear those boots on Guadalcanal, your feet would be rotted in a mess. But having this guy who's, he makes it through Guadalcanal, and then he's the guy that tests Griff to see if he's ready to actually be able to take a squadron and order men to their deaths. The end of the movie there where he's suffering engine failure and he's trying to get home and he gets bounced. Yeah, I had a lot of sympathy for him.
I appreciated the death his role played in the film, but I thought his death was so ridiculous. Like getting shot down, like totally cool with that as a concept in this movie. It's an airplane movie, got it. But the thing is, it's like we've made fun of it before here, which is the 1940s, 1950s. Like you hear the pa-ting! And then guy clutches his chest and is like, ugh! Yeah. And he does this in a moving airplane.
Yeah.
Like his airplane catches on fire. You see him throw the cockpit roof
canopy.
Canopy. Yeah, I forgot about the word for a second. Throws the canopy back. He stands up and he's about to jump out, and literally he gets stitched with machine gun fire as he's standing up, and he throws his arms back. He's like, ah, and then his plane blows up. And I was like, really? You couldn't have just had his plane blow up and call it good? Like you had to have him do the dramatic, obvious 1940s, like, oh no, I've been killed.
Yeah, and when you look at what happens to these guys when they're trying to get out and the plane is spinning down out of control or in a dive, you're going 400 miles an hour. I like that whole scene was very ridiculous. He would have been, pinned to the side of the fuselage or, sucked right out of the cockpit. But yeah, the silliness of that scene kind of contrasts very poorly with some of the actual combat footage on the ground that they included in the movie, for sure. Yeah. But
I personally, my favorite character was Clancy.
Yeah, and I like Clancy too.
He's another trope, the scrounger, the guy that gets you whatever you need. I liked him because my dad, he's an Air Force vet. He did Panama, First Gulf War, OIF, Enduring Freedom, all that stuff. And the few times I've heard him talk about his experiences doing that, those deployments, he was a flying crew chief for cargo planes. And the stories that I've heard him tell reminds me a lot of Clancy, where he's like, oh yeah, I traded this to get a case of French MREs because they have booze in them. It's, it's very that. So when I see the character Clancy, I implant my dad as being that character. Also, he just has some great scenes where it's like, oh, I found cake. Where'd you find cake? Shut up. That's where.
You never got this from me. Yeah, okay. I'm going to change my vote. I like Clancy too. 100%. And there was actually a real life Clancy in that first group that came to Guadalcanal. There was a mess sergeant that was Dick Mangram's mess sergeant in VMSB 232, the dive bomber squadron, and his name was Grunky, and he set up what he called Grunky's Grill after they got ashore.
I really hope that was also what he called his post-war adventures.
I'm not sure.
I really hope.
He did survive the war. This is a guy who, at a time where the Marines and the Marine aviators were all eating weevily, maggot-ridden Japanese rice, and like some of the gunners couldn't even eat that, so they were surviving off of stocks of Hershey's chocolate bars that they brought with them. At one point, they were served before a mission where they thought they were going against the Japanese carrier fleet. They were fed chunks of cow tongue, I think, that were boiled.
Yummy.
Just horrible, horrible stuff. Grunky shows up, and he scores steaks off of one of the Navy vessels that was offshore that day, offloading stuff. And like a friend of a friend had a brother who was in the mess of the particular ship, and they were able to get steaks out of him. So they had a big steak feed. So he became known as having the best place to eat on the island. And for the first couple of, probably 10 days, the pilots and the gunners, they didn't have their mess kits. They didn't have cups. They didn't have silverware. They didn't have tents. They didn't have any kind of sleeping accommodations. They ended up just under tarps, sleeping on captured Japanese straw mats. And for food, they would go over to the 11th Marine Mess, which was the artillery regiment for the 1st Marine Division, and they would get food there. Whatever the Mud Marines were eating, basically, they were eating too. So Grunky ended up being a big morale boost for the aviators, and not a few Mud Marines would slip into their lines to get food there too.
You gotta do what you gotta do. Speaking of Mud Marines, the reason I just thought about this, obviously, like there's a really powerful scene where John Wayne, he gets a record player from Clancy so he can play a little record that like his kid gave him, and it's like his tie to home. The scene where he's actually home with his wife is a very powerful one for me. Because I was a kid during OIF and all that, so like I relate to dad being gone and all that stuff. But the reason I was so butthurt, and Jack sent me a text that perfectly elaborated how I felt, because he sent me a text like, as he's watching it, and he's like, I wish somebody'd give me a Japanese sword. Like, and I was like, yeah. Like, when my dad came back from Iraq, all I got was a Republican Guard beret. Like, that, like, don't get me wrong, I thought that was cool when I was a kid, but I was like, man, I got a hat, and this kid got a fucking sword. This is a raw deal.
I knew a fighter pilot who was in New Guinea, shot a Japanese bomber down, found it in the jungle not far from his base, and he pulled the machine gun out of the tail stinger, and he was able to get that packed and shipped and sent home. And he actually had that Japanese 7.7 millimeter machine gun until the late 70s, when fire consumed his family's business. And
I was going to say until the ATF was formed.
Yeah, right. I tried to take a 37 millimeter cannon shell home from Afghanistan. And
live or used?
Oh no, it was a spent.
Okay, figured we'd differentiate that.
Yeah, no, it was a spent shell. I had been hanging out with a Czech unit at a place called FOB Altimer, and they let me climb into the turret of a BMP and fire the autocannon. and I had a lot of fun doing that. And when I was done, there was spent ammo all over the place. The casings, the brass casings. So I grabbed one and I thought, okay, I'll bring this home to my son. And I had all that stuff shipped. I went home and I get this note from a sergeant who was in an artillery unit and then in the postal unit at Fob Shank saying, we cannot forward you your 105 millimeter artillery shell due to whatever regulation, yada, yada, yada. So I never actually got it. And I thought it was pretty hilarious that an NCO thought my 37 millimeter shell was a 105 shell casing. Those things are huge. So,
So you mentioned that my dad, like I said, he was a crew chief for cargo airplanes. So when he was in, I think it was Afghanistan, there was a AC-130 that stopped or landed at the airfield he was at, and it was like post a fire mission. So they're like, hey, can we get some people to help empty the plane of our spent brass?
Oh yeah.
And so now my dad at home has on his shelf combat used shell from each gun on a 130.
He got that home?
Well, it's a lot easier to get shit home
That's
when
awesome.
when you also
have the C-17.
yeah. If you are the guy who's in charge of the fucking C-17, like, you get to take whatever you want home. Like,
That's so true. Oh my gosh.
it's the same reason he's like when he went to, like, whenever he'd go to Germany, he'd always come home with like cases and cases of beer, because it's like I don't have to go through customs.
That's awesome. I had to go through customs on my way home in Iraq, and the guys took literally everything out of everything I was carrying. I had 120 pounds of gear with me, and they cleared me. I got to Ramstein, and as I was trying to get on a C-17, I was going home because my wife at the time was diagnosed with cancer. So I was kind of on an emergency, and they had put me on a flight that officially didn't exist to get me home quicker. And as I was going through security to get on the flight, this NCO took a look at my Leatherman tool set and said, "Oh no, I can't let you on that flight with that airplane." I said, "I have been on probably 5 C-17s with this, and there's been no issues whatsoever. I've been on a C-130. I wasn't on a C-130. It was like a C-22, I think. And I just went through customs in Iraq." He's like, "Nope, not going to happen. You can come and get it in 30 days, though, if you want." I was like, "Okay, have fun with it." And he's like, he was like really indignant. "I'm not taking it for me." Yeah, right. Like, I'm getting on a plane with 300 guys with M16s, and he's worried about my Leatherman. Okay.
It's sharp and dangerous.
Sharp and dangerous, I guess. I don't know. But I was butthurt about it because it was a gift from a friend of mine named Sean Parnell, who I wrote a book with called Outlaw Platoon when I got home. And actually, I went to Iraq in part to be able to write Outlaw Platoon more effectively. So, with Sean. So it was one of those moments where I lost a gift, but I could have used your dad in that moment, for sure, John.
Oh, my dad smuggled it. I shouldn't use the word smuggled. You're
gonna get in trouble.
Yeah.
he reallocated a lot of stuff back to the States.
Excellent.
Ha! Checkmate. NSA agent listening to us.
That's right. That's all you need, is you need to make friends with a flying crew chief, and you can get whatever you want back.
This is very, very true. I should have thought about that, because I actually lost my IBA also. I went over with body armor that I had purchased, myself, and then they decided to issue me U.S. Army standard issue body armor. So I had that extra piece of kit, and I just couldn't carry it all in, my carry-all stuff. I couldn't wear it. I couldn't stuff it in my duffel. I had too much other stuff. So I had it shipped, but it and my boots vanished en route, so I never got it back.
I do remember something that was fun. Aside from the Republican Guard beret, he also brought back like stacks, like bank stacks of dinars.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like the ones that still had Saddam's face printed on them, because by the time we took over Baghdad, that all that was basically worthless. So yeah, I have tons of Saddam money in my drawer over there.
Is that worth anything?
Oh, I'm sure it's probably worth something to some collector somewhere at this point.
Yeah.
But also with the way they're, damn it, it's pretty crisp for being like 20 years old.
Oh, look at that!
Well, look at you, mad money millionaire.
Wow.
Yeah, I have
Saddam's
200.
looking pretty good in that image of him.
Yeah,
Not
I
in the
got.
spider hole.
I don't know what the exchange rate for 250 dinars from the Central Bank of Iraq is, but if I ever visit, I also got a.
Probably as much as the Reichsmark, I'd say.
Yeah, I also forgot. I have the an original.
The most wanted cards.
Yep, I have the original set.
Yeah.
My goal is to one day. I'll let you continue here in a moment, Jack. My goal is to one day open this up and pull out the Saddam card and then frame it with the dinar, but because I feel like that'd be a cool little display.
Oh yeah.
But you were going to say, Jack?
Right, those playing cards, they were given to soldiers so they'd recognize the people better, right?
Yep.
Fun fact, they did something similar with felons in prisons, where they would issue them playing cards with like details of unsolved crimes on them and like unidentified people. And yes, this sounds crazy, but it actually led to 23 of them being solved.
You're kidding.
Just a little fun factoid for you today.
Well, one of the things that I thought with this film, they had a lot of potential to explore it, and then they sort of went back to the kind of Hollywood standard Dawn Patrol, Hell's Angels sort of aspect of combat aviation, and that was the whole stuff about John Wayne's character has got all these new, fresh, revolutionary ideas about close air support and ground attack. And I mean, all of that was like the whole purpose of marine aviation was to support the mud marines. That was doctrinally what they were focused on doing with everything they did and developed in the 30s. What happened at Guadalcanal and then later on in the Solomons was they figured out ways to more closely cooperate to get the aircraft on targets faster and more accurately. And the Marines figured out a way to do that better than anybody else in World War II. And their close air support was second to none by the time they get to Iwo Jima and Okinawa in 45, which is one of the reasons why they had a Marine Air Wing or several Marine Air Wings operating in the Philippines. They were actually supporting U.S. troops, U.S. Army troops. There were no Marine ground troops in the Philippines, but they did such a good job of close air support that they were integral in MacArthur's final invasions of the islands in the Philippines in 44 and 45.
So I think one of the last things we should hit on is what was our least favorite moment or scene in this film?
What was yours, John?
Sorry. That Baja Blast really went down hard. I think I wouldn't say it's a particular scene, but it's a recurring thing that I saw, which was, we talked about how awful the living conditions on Guadalcanal were, and like with the infantry guys and most of the pilots, they're all wearing like these super dirty, grungy flight suits and uniforms, and they're disheveled. Except for John Wayne, every scene John Wayne is in, he has a perfectly clean and crisp uniform with, his 45 dangling low on his hip while everybody else is wearing their belt like a normal fucking person. That just bugged me. It distracted me. I'm like, why can't he also look like everybody else? Like, he's John Wayne. I know he's the main character. I don't need anything else to help me distinguish him as that. Like, let him wear a uniform that looks like everybody else's. Where did this guy find a washing machine? Because last time I checked, Clancy stole one to use as a fuel pump. So I don't know where he's getting clean uniforms from.
That's a good point. Yeah, he doesn't. He never looks disheveled in this film. Yeah, like he's above the mud. Huh.
Jack, what about you?
You mentioned it earlier, but during the pating deaths.
Because a plane exploding isn't dramatic enough.
Yeah, like, not every pilot was shot, right? Like, there had to have been a couple, at least 5 or so, that just went down with the ship. And
Yeah, at least 5.
I don't know, maybe I'm ballparking it for conservatively.
How about you, John? What was your least favorite scene or moment or thing in this film?
It's understandable what they decided to do with this film, in that they used F6F Hellcats that were painted like night fighters, that deep midnight blue color. So being an aviation historian and a purist, not having the F4F Wildcats at Guadalcanal, as much as you can forgive it, because they didn't have CGI, there was no Warbirds community that was, rebuilding these things at that point, aside from Ed Maloney out at Plains of Fame in Chino, California.
Yeah, not really commemorative Air Force yet.
Yeah, they just didn't have the F4Fs to do it, and they would have had to rely on models. So it's a forgivable sin, and the Hellcat looks similar to the Wildcat, but still, being a purist, it kind of bothered me seeing that. And you see later on Okinawa, they're operating from an airfield, and there's all these wrecked Japanese planes. All they did was they took the models that they had made, the mock-ups of the Hellcats that they blew up on Henderson Field earlier in the movie, and painted them and put meatballs on them, the rising suns on the wings, and made them Japanese wrecks. And, it's like, okay, come on. Those are so clearly the Hellcats from earlier in the film. Hughes was cutting costs then, I guess.
Well, can you blame him? I mean, ROK Pictures, when he took it over, went from 30 films a year to 9 films a year because of all of his cost-cutting measures.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, there was a significant downturn in output when he took over, but he was also running TWA into the ground at that point. So
well, and John Wayne wasn't cheap. I mean, I think he was paid $300,000 for this movie. That was his pay. I mean, like, what is $300,000 in 1951 dollars? That's a lot of money.
John Wayne was making an absurd amount of money in this point in his career, because I can't remember what the amount was, but in The Horse Soldiers, it was him and William Holden. The two of them, their combined cost for appearing in the film was more than what it made at the box office.
Wow.
Because the production studio really banked on people being like, Bill Holden and John Wayne, all right. And then it failed miserably.
I didn't know that. It was that film was a box office failure?
It barely broke even.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, so that 300K he was paid is worth 3.6 mil today.
It's a good chunk of change.
Yeah, I can't imagine that the rest of the production cost much more than that, because most of the footage was shot right around Pendleton with, Marine Corps aviation. Yeah, oh, you know what? But they had to pay for Paul Mance's B-25, so that had to have been pretty costly. That whole incident. I've got two last anecdotes for you on this movie. The first is Paul Mance, who was the director of aviation photography for the film and a legendary Hollywood pilot. Was using one of his. He had two B-25s that he used as camera planes, and they were filming the sequence where the squadron was attacking Japanese buildings and strafing and firing rockets, and they wanted him to come in super low and film the demolition of one of the Japanese held fortifications or building or something. And Paul Mance had worked with these demolition guys before. He was really jumpy about the idea of trusting them. And he's like, look, do not detonate this building until we are past it, and we will film the explosion with the camera in the tail gun position. They're like, yeah, whatever. Okay, we'll do it. Well, of course, he's less than 200 feet off the deck. He's going over the building, and the demolition guys blow it up. And it blew rivets out. It shattered every single piece of plexiglass on the B-25. It blew the cameraman in the tail all the way into the waist gun position. And they declared an emergency, and they were barely able to limp to Orange County Airport, which is what, John Wayne Airport now? And they basically executed an emergency landing, and the plane was so badly damaged it had to basically be completely rebuilt. So that definitely was something that was folded into the cost of production. But the other story I wanted to tell you was, while they were at Pendleton, John L. Smith's daughter ran into John Wayne and invited him to dinner at the Smith household, and John Wayne accepted. And John L. Smith was completely shocked when his 8-year-old daughter came home and said, "Hey, Dad, John Wayne's coming for dinner." And John Wayne was a complete gentleman at the table. When she told me that story, she remembered it very fondly, and she remembered John Wayne and her dad, John L. Smith, getting along very, very well. So it was kind of a unique opportunity, and have a movie star over for dinner.
I couldn't imagine inviting a movie star and them actually taking up your offer.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's not something you would see every day. But of course, John L. Smith, he was a national hero, held the Medal of Honor, was revered in his hometown and all throughout the United States during the war. So he was a celebrity in his own right.
I think that's a nice story to end on, a positive note, if you will. So Jack, what are you drinking today?
Well, since it's summer, I'm drinking Boulevard Brewing's Tropic Slam, a tart ale with guava, pineapple, and orange. We're not sponsored by Boulevard, but we could be.
We definitely could be. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Yeah, John.
A nice tropic beer for a Pacific Theater film. I dig it.
Wasn't what I was going for, but I'll take it.
Yeah. John, what do you have on deck today? I know you said you didn't have any alcohol.
It bums me out. I meant to bring my bottle of Four Spirits bourbon. And actually, so here at my office, I'm having a bar installed on the 12th. So I will actually have all of my hooch down here. Because, everybody needs liquor in their office, right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Four Spirits is a local distillery here in Oregon. It is named in honor of four guys from Delta Company 2 of the 162 Infantry who were killed in June and then in November of 2004. And one of the guys from Delta Company, whose name is Dawson Officer, who'd been one of my wife's high school students. She was a teacher at Central High School in Independence, Oregon. Dawson came home from Iraq and he started this little distillery, and he had it for a while in the generator room of the mostly abandoned Adair Air Force Station. And then he and his brother built a complete distillery and restaurant in South Corvallis. That's absolutely fantastic. It's one of my favorite places in the area. So whenever I'm working on a book or working on an article, I will start with a shot of Four Spirits bourbon.
They also are not our sponsor, but they could be.
I will have a chat with Dawson.
You know what? Please do. We are desperate and we will sell our soul to anybody. So today I kind of wanted to go. It's gone now. I finished it, but I had some Suntory whiskey, which is a Japanese whiskey brand. It'd been a minute since I'd had it, so I figured I'd have myself a glass again, seeing as we were doing Pacific Theater. That was intentional, unlike Jack. So yeah, it's nice. It's a mid-range whiskey, at least the bottle I had. So I enjoy it from time to time. I also was counterbalancing it with my Baja Blast. So
Right on.
but I think we're at that point in our show where we rate this thing. I don't know how familiar you are with our ratings, but we do a 1 to 5 rating around here. We don't do stars because we think stars are boring. We usually do 1 to 5 things. And I'm open to suggestions, but I think we've touched on it a little bit as something that's kind of obnoxious and out there, but is very defining of the film. I personally think we should do a rating of 1 to 5 cowboy boots, but
I'm down with that.
Jack, do you think 1 to 5 cowboy boots?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Jack, 1 to 5, what do you give this?
I'm not actually sure. John B, what would you give it?
You know what? I have to say, okay, so 1 is the best, 5 is the worst?
5 is
that
the
right?
best.
5 is
5 is the best, 1 is the worst.
I'd give it a strong 4 for the historical touches. As far as the historic accuracy of John L. Smith goes, and the actual experience of 223, which this was supposed to be about, I'd say a solid 2.
So you're giving it a solid a two boot rating?
Yeah, you could, yeah, I'd have to
Okay.
say 2.
I would give this film. I liked it. I think it's definitely a step up from Flying Tigers. I know it's not really fair to compare the two, but I mean they have the same writers, similar subject matters, same leading actor, so it's hard not to. I think this was done better than Flying Tigers. I have no idea what I gave Flying Tigers, but it wasn't a great score. Really, my big beef with it is that, it's a typical 1950s movie. It's a little corny in places, but I still enjoyed it. So I would give it 3 boots.
Yeah, that's fair. And I completely agree with you. It's a much better movie than Flying Tigers. The combat footage alone is worth the watch because you're not going to see it anywhere else. And there's some really unique moments in there. There's gun camera footage from a VF-17 intercept of a Japanese bomber formation that was carrying those Oka rocket-propelled kamikaze bombs. And that's probably the only gun camera footage that exists of those Japanese raids. So, yeah, I mean, that's worth the ticket, the price of admission right there.
The $3.99 on Amazon.
The $3.99 on Amazon. Yeah. Yep.
Jack?
I think I give this about 4 cowboy boots, but they're scuffed up.
Right
Actually, no. Actually, I take that back. That's a compliment. 4 brand new shiny cowboy boots.
Wow. That is a significantly higher rating than what I was expecting from you.
I say that, but cowboy boots aren't meant to be shiny. They're meant to be worn down and shitty.
Okay, but so what pushes this to the 4 cowboy boot rating as opposed to a 3 scuffed up cowboy boot?
Well, I gotta give it for the real combat footage, unflinching. Um, the effects were stellar for 1950s. That surprised me. The color was really good in this movie, although I probably watched a
Technicolor.
remastered version. Yeah, Inglorious Technicolor. But
Love me some Technicolor.
Yeah, I agree. Jack, you're right. Those things
I
alone
rarely
really
am, but thanks.
those things really, push the merits of the movie. Where I just get wound up with it is the plot is kind of silly, and
War is a rather silly affair.
yeah, I would have to agree. The absurdities that I saw,
As was tradition in the great kerfuffle known as the Second World War.
We all got a little silly then.
yeah. If you take out the whole plot line between Griff and John Wayne, the movie would have been much better if they hadn't had that conflict internally, because that's something you see in Dawn Patrol.
If only we didn't have that pesky John Wayne in this movie, it would have been stellar.
Yeah, it's just, come on, the tropes are just they're so overdone. It's like these guys were just they were milking the gravy train that had been going on for 15 years. But yeah, I mean, the merits of the movie really rest on the realistic combat footage. Like when they blew up the PBY, that was all done on a lot someplace in
broke
Southern
my heart.
California. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, that was pretty cool. So yeah, like the merits really are the combat footage.
All right, Jack, what does Rotten Tomatoes give this?
1 second.
This is where we test our prowess against real movie critics.
Googling. All right, so the official tomometer is at 75%, and the audience score is at 63%.
Huh.
You know,
I was expecting it.
I feel like going more with an audience on this one.
Yeah, I think that's about right. The thermometer is a bit higher than I was expecting it to be.
Yeah, me too. But it's worth a watch. I mean,
yeah, this is definitely, this is not on my I'm going to watch it once a year list like some movies are, but this is worth at least a watch.
100%.
Yeah.
The actual footage they shot, like the ridiculous aspect of this is like, okay, when they intersperse all the footage that they shot for the movie, specifically at Camp Pendleton, it's California, right? There's no effort to turn it into a junglescape.
Man, who could have thought
California.
who could have thought Okinawa looked like California?
Yeah, well, Okinawa was probably closer than Guadalcanal, but to Southern California. But even so, if you could get past the fact that Guadalcanal has all these giant mountains in the background because they're shooting in Southern California, and you can see the San Gabriels. That footage that they shot there of the attacks that the Corsairs were making and the dropping of the napalm bombs, I mean, that was live stuff they were actually doing, and that's just from a historic perspective, it's an interesting thing to see, for sure.
All right, well, John, it has been an absolute pleasure having you with us. I know you mentioned that you just had a new book come out. If you'd like to share that, and then any kind of social medias you have, or any kind of events you got going on coming up soon, the floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you very much, John. Yeah, the book is called 53 Days on Starvation Island, and it's the story of the first 53 days on Guadalcanal as seen through the eyes of John L. Smith, Mary Carl, and Richard Mangrum, and their fellow aviators. My social media, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and LinkedIn, and I'm just John R. Bruning. I put the R in there because there was a John Bruning who was, I think, the state attorney general for Nebraska, and we kept getting our searches mixed up. So long ago, and early on in my career, I went from John Bruning Jr. to John R. Bruning as a writer.
You know, of all the people you could be mixed up with, that's not a bad one. You know, at least you don't share your name with like a serial killer or something.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. If my name had been John Wayne Casey, I'd probably be in big trouble as a writer. But yeah, please find me. I post lots of little interesting stuff, historical stuff on Twitter. Also cat pictures, because my cat actually has more followers on Instagram than I do. Not that I'm jealous, but I am. Yeah, so that's where I live on the web.
That's great. Jack, do you have anything else?
I do not.
Alrighty. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review. The stars do matter. If you want additional content from us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Discord under Armchair Commanders. And until next time, I've been John.
And I'm Jack.
And John, it's been great having you with us.
It's been a real pleasure, guys. Thank you so much. What a great way to spend a Saturday afternoon. Thank you.
Jack.
Bye.